Here's what we know and what we don't know up to this hour. It's been one of the most horrifying attacks ever against the United States on home soil. Terrorists crashed two airliners, separately, not far apart, two hijacked airliners, apparently American Airlines commercial jets, into the World Trade Center. This deadly series of blows brought down the twin 110-story towers. A plane also rammed into the Pentagon as the government itself was brought under attack. Now, we want to show you in sequence what happened this morning at the World Trade Centers. These buildings at the tip of Manhattan. First, an aircraft, and that is the plane, comes in and hits a World Trade Center building. This was the second hit, if you will, I believe. Then after the two planes, one hit one tower, then another hit another tower. You see the plane went deep into the building, and indeed one witness said it almost came out the other side. That was a quote. Then, incredibly, unbelievably, almost inconceivably, one of the huge twin towers began to collapse from the top, quickly cascading down, completely, totally destroyed. A rain of steel and concrete. Other buildings around began to collapse. A horrific sight. And then, as before that could even be absorbed as a fact, the second tower began to collapse. Those events between just before 9 a.m. Eastern Time this morning and around 10 a.m. Eastern Time this morning. And then another plane crashed into a helipad near the Pentagon and put part of the Pentagon in Washington, the U.S. Defense Department headquarters, in flames and filled with smoke. The Defense Department later confirmed there had been some fatalities. They did not say how many, and there were injuries at this place. Then there was a plane crash, apparently, reportedly and supposedly a crashed plane in western Pennsylvania. And Russ Mitchell's been trying to get the facts on that. Russ?
That's right, Dan. United Airlines says Flight 93, which was a Boeing 757, left Newark, New Jersey at 8:01 this morning Eastern Time, was headed for San Francisco with 38 passengers, 2 pilots, and 5 flight attendants. United Airlines has confirmed that plane did crash about 80 miles from Pittsburgh. There are no survivors, according to United, at this time.
Russ Mitchell. And then there is the case of a plane is believed to have crashed in the area of the presidential retreat at Camp David, Maryland. But quite frankly, the facts on that remain in some doubt. Now, we're told that President Bush has just landed at Moffett Air Force Base in Nebraska. Remember, the president started the day in Florida. He was on a out of Washington trip to Florida. Then he turned up at Barksdale Air Force Base outside Shreveport, Louisiana, made his second statement of the day. Now, we're told Moffett Air Force Base in Nebraska. Why would he go there? Well, for one thing, the DEFCOM planes are headquartered at this place in Moffett Air Force Base, we're told, and that is that there are special aircraft which, in case of, say, a nuclear attack or some other national emergency, that the president could board one of those aircrafts. They have special facilities in case of a national emergency. Now, I want to emphasize the president's been traveling in Air Force One, which has very sophisticated equipment, but is not, in fact, a so-called DEFCOM plane. That's special aircraft. We don't know that President Bush is boarding one of these DEFCOM planes. We're told what we know, and all we know, is that he went from Barksdale Air Force Base in Shreveport to Moffett Air Force Base in Nebraska, and he's now receiving what's called as an up-to-date briefing at the air base in Nebraska. Where he intends to go after this, if anywhere today, is unknown. We'll try to keep you posted as we go along on the president's movements, but a decision was made. He said first, when he was in Florida, he said he was going back to Washington. But a decision was made that he was not going to do that. It was unannounced, as probably should not have been. He wound up in Barksdale Air Force Base, as I say, and now is at Moffett Air Force Base in Nebraska, where it said that he's getting a briefing. Let me pause and say that I've made a mistake here. The responsibility is mine and the blame is mine. It is Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska, not Moffett, Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska. So the situation at this hour, let's review. The casualties are many. There are many dead, and New York hospitals are overflowing with the wounded from the collapse, the twin collapse of the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. There have been some fatalities, the number unknown, at the Pentagon when an aircraft was crashed into the Pentagon. American commercial airlines say that at least 4 planes were hijacked this morning as part of what appears to be a concerted effort at terrorism. American Airlines says 2 of its planes were crashed into the World Trade Center. That would be American Airlines Flight 77, Dulles to Los Angeles, and American Flight 11, Boston to Los Angeles. And let me note, asterisks bottom of the page, mentally, if you will, that there's some discrepancy. The eyewitnesses, several eyewitnesses, said they thought that one of the planes that hit one of the World Trade Centers was not a large airliner. Now, a Dulles to Los Angeles flight would figure to be quite a large airliner, and a Boston to Los Angeles flight would figure to be quite a large airliner. We have no explanation for that. A Boeing 757, one of the planes believed to have crashed in the World Trade Center, and a Boeing 767, another plane believed to have crashed into the other World Trade Center. That'll perhaps be sorted out as time goes along, but American says it believes that its 2 planes, these 2 planes, crashed into the World Trade Centers. Then United Flight 175, also a Boeing 767, large aircraft, flying Boston to Los Angeles, was hijacked in flight. And then United Flight number 93, Newark to San Francisco, another Boeing 757, was hijacked. Those are the 4 planes known to have been hijacked. Bill Richardson, one time, in fact, until fairly recently, head of the Department of Energy in Washington, also once the United States ambassador to the United Nations, very experienced politically, and also someone who's been involved with intelligence information about terrorist networks, is with us in our Washington Bureau. Mr. Secretary, it's good to see you again.
Thank you, Dan.
Try to give us some perspective here, and also let's address the alleged bin Laden connection to all this.
It seems to me, Dan, and I used to every morning get an intelligence briefing that I don't get anymore, but my sense, Dan, is that this was a coordinated attack. It took a lot of resources. It basically points to a sophisticated network that would be bin Laden. I recall when I was UN ambassador trying to get him extradited, going to Afghanistan, and basically getting stiff-armed by the Taliban. Now, I think what is very important here, Dan, is besides dealing with the tragedy, besides supporting the president fully, he is fully in charge, and we should come together as a country. I think it's important that we ensure and take steps right away so that this doesn't happen again. I think we need a massive effort to upgrade our terrorism capability. I think the war is not just a missile war or a military war. We've got terrorism that crosses borders. Secondly, I always sensed that when I was in the government that we had a lot of very good agencies, a lot of good people dealing with terrorism, but somehow we need better coordination. I would put a terrorism SAR. I think also we need a national commission appointed by the president to look at what happened and what steps we need to take, bipartisan, to deal with this massive attack on America. So those are the steps that I think we need to take. Obviously, we need to upgrade our human intelligence. As Senator McCain said, basically spies infiltrating some of these terrorist cells, but also satellites, because this is such a massive attack that I think we needed both more human intelligence, but also more satellite and the kind of sophisticated intelligence that we've been investing so much in.
Mr. Secretary, based on your experience with looking into these kinds of things, and you said you made a trip to Afghanistan trying to get the Taliban government to help with catching Osama bin Laden. After there were attacks on the U.S. embassies in Eastern Africa in 1998, President Clinton authorized 2 sets of missile attacks, cruise missile attacks, one against in Afghanistan, one in the Sudan. in retaliation for what he said were clear indications that Osama bin Laden, and pointed out bin Laden's connections to Sudan and Afghanistan. My point is that after those attacks, bin Laden became even bigger in the minds of those haters of America, particularly those who are of Muslim religion, than he was before. So what I'm grasping for here is some indication of what does a nation such as ours, what are the options for this or any other president when this kind of thing happens? The last time, I say, one of the last times we launched these missile attacks, and frankly, the evidence is that they didn't do much good.
Dan, I think the president has a limited option here, and the option is if we can find bin Laden, locate him, get good enough intelligence, a massive retaliation against him. I think that's called for very clearly if he is the perpetrator. The second thing, Dan, is we need to get the international community, our allies, our friends, developing countries, to recognize that terrorism is a worldwide threat, that this has happened to everybody, so we've got to get more international cooperation, NATO, Asian nations, African nations. And thirdly, there's got to be a response against the countries like Afghanistan that may harbor these terrorists, or certain countries in the Middle East, that if they don't turn them over, and they have them, they can't use legalisms, and that they would also be subject to a very tough response. I think, Dan, with terrorism, you deal with it, needless to say, we need a stronger intelligence capability. We need to be better prepared. But we also have to have an international effort. We can't do it alone. But I think the most important step here, Dan, is we got to rally around the president, rally around as a country. This is an unprecedented attack. We've been violated. But you've got to start planning for the next day to ensure that this never happens again.
Former Secretary of Energy, former Ambassador to the United Nations for the U.S., Richardson, we thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador.
This is Jack Williams here at the WBZ studios in Boston, and let's talk a little bit about the Boston connection to the absolute tragic attacks today. Joe Lawless, who's at Massport Security, was able to tell us a couple of interesting facts in a news conference a short time ago. 2 flights taking off from Logan Airport this morning were both hijacked. Both of those planes had spent time on the ground, in fact, overnight at Logan Airport. He did not say, but one would have to presume that the hijackers got on those 2 planes here in Boston since they overnighted. Now, Lawless said the 220 aircraft either took off or departed from Logan this morning. 2 are unaccounted for. We now know they are American Airlines flight number 11, taking off at 7:59 this morning with 92 people on board. It had a Boston crew. John Oganowski, the pilot. Second pilot was Tom McGinnis of Stratham, New Hampshire. We also know on board, we've confirmed that one of the co-founders and chief technology officer and board member of the Acme Technology in Cambridge was on the American Airlines flight. Daniel Lewin, 31 years old, survived by a wife and 2 sons. The other flight that took off from Boston this morning that was hijacked was a United Airlines flight 175. Both of these flights were scheduled to go from Boston nonstop to Los Angeles. On that United Airlines flight, there were 65 people on board. We haven't heard any names yet of the pilots and crew, if they're in fact were a Boston-based crew. We just know that they left at 8:14 this morning. Now, that plane went down. We're unable to confirm, and so far, government officials will not confirm where that plane went down. We know that 2 planes did hit those towers. You're seeing pictures in the background, one about 8:45 this morning and the other at 9 o'clock. Families of victims are gathering at Logan Airport. The airport, by the way, has been shut down. Let's go to Casey Kaufman now near the airport. Casey.
All right, Jack, we now have a clearer picture of the events and the enormity of the tragedy, and as it relates to Boston and to Logan Airport. Massport officials just provided us with a snapshot of the morning. They say between 7 and 9 a.m., 220 aircraft movements at Logan, including 106 departures and 140 14 arrivals were registered. Now, that left 2 unaccounted for, and we now know that those 2 jetliners that were involved in 2 of the deadly crashes today actually originated from Boston.